Your silence doesn't affect her because she expected it. She knew there would come a day when you'd stop explaining yourself, stop chasing, stop trying to make her understand what she was losing. But what she didn't expect was that your silence would come with peace instead of pain. She thought your quiet would be filled with frustration, that you'd still be watching her from a distance, waiting for her to notice you again. She thought your silence would mean defeat, not evolution, but silence alone without transformation means nothing, because silence that's empty only feeds her ego, while silence that's built on growth shakes her pride. At first, she doesn't care that you've gone quiet. In her mind, it's just another reaction, another phase. She tells herself you'll be back when the emotions calm down. She thinks you're just giving her space because you don't know what else to do. That's why your silence doesn't bother her, because she believes she still holds emotional control. As long as she feels your energy chasing her in silence, as long as your thoughts still revolve around her absence, she doesn't feel your distance. She feels your attachment even in your quiet. And that's why silence without growth is useless. Because silence isn't about saying nothing. It's about becoming someone new while saying nothing. The moment your silence turns into focus, everything begins to change. When your quiet becomes filled with purpose, when you start building, improving, healing, she starts to notice something different. You're no longer the same man who once reacted to her every move. You're no longer watching her story, no longer sending those long messages, no longer orbiting around her validation. Your silence now carries strength, not sorrow. It's the difference between waiting in the dark and walking away toward the light. She begins to sense it in ways words can't explain. The energy she once felt from your presence starts fading, replaced by something colder, stronger, indifference. And that's when your silence begins to hit her. Not because she misses the sound of your voice, but because she no longer feels the power she once had over your emotions. That's when she starts to realize that the silence she expected isn't the one she's experiencing. You're not just quiet, you've evolved. You're not punishing her, you've moved on. And when your silence is no longer about her, it becomes unshakable. Because real silence doesn't seek a reaction, it creates reflection. It doesn't demand attention, it commands it through absence. That's the silence that lingers, the silence that makes her question everything she took for granted. She thought she could predict your silence, but she never expected you to find peace inside it. Because when your silence is born from growth, not pain, that's when it finally starts to affect her the way you always hoped it would. Many men believe that silence alone will make a woman realize their worth, that disappearing or withholding words will somehow create longing or regret. But silence without self-respect is nothing more than emotional weakness dressed as control. It's an illusion of power that still comes from need. Because if your silence is driven by the hope that she'll miss you, then you're not really silent, you're still waiting to be noticed. You're not detached, you're hiding behind the quiet, hoping she will chase what you're too afraid to lose. And that kind of silence never affects her because she can still feel your emotional dependence even if you never say a word. When a woman no longer values you, she studies your energy, not your words. She knows when your silence is genuine and when it's just a reaction. If you go quiet but still check her social media, still think about her daily, still wait for her message, she knows. She can sense that your emotions are still orbiting around her, and that means she still holds power. Your silence won't make her question herself, because in her mind, she hasn't lost anything yet. You're still emotionally present, even in absence. And that's why silence, without the backbone of self-respect, never creates an impact. But when your silence is born from strength, from acceptance, from understanding that your value doesn't need her validation, that's when it changes everything. Real silence isn't about cutting her off. It's about cutting off the version of yourself that tolerated disrespect. It's about reclaiming your emotional energy and redirecting it where it belongs, toward yourself, your goals, your peace. The kind of silence that grows from awareness, not pride, starts to rebuild your sense of self. You stop waiting for her reaction because your focus shifts to becoming a man whose worth no longer depends on how anyone treats him. And that's the silence she eventually feels. The one that doesn't chase, doesn't prove, doesn't seek attention. It's a silence backed by growth and grounded in peace. You're not playing games anymore. You've simply stopped participating in them. And when she sees that your quiet isn't about manipulation but transformation, that's when confusion hits her. Because that's the moment she realizes she no longer controls the narrative. True silence isn't a strategy, it's evolution. It's not the absence of words, it's the presence of strength. The power of your silence depends entirely on what you do with it. If you use it to wait, it weakens you. But if you use it to rise, it redefines you. Because silence without self-respect is just another form of begging. But silence with self-worth is a statement of freedom. And nothing unsettles a woman more than the quiet confidence of a man who no longer needs to be heard to be understood. When a woman no longer values you, your silence doesn't make her wonder what's wrong. It makes her feel like she's won. Her ego interprets your withdrawal as surrender, not strength. She believes you've gone quiet because you've run out of ways to reach her, that your silence is proof she's in control. In her mind, she still has power over you because she assumes your quiet comes from pain, not peace. And as long as your silence carries that hidden hope that she'll notice, it only fuels her ego further. She feels validated, not challenged. She sees herself as the one who dictated the ending, not the one who caused it. That's why your silence by itself doesn't affect her. It confirms the story she's already telling herself. When you disappear without change, she doesn't miss you because she doesn't feel the loss of your presence. She feels the satisfaction of her dominance. She sees your quiet as proof that she was right about you, that you couldn't handle her indifference. The ego always feeds on reactions, and silence born from weakness is still a reaction. Even when you say nothing, your energy speaks. If that energy still carries pain, she feels your defeat, not your detachment. And that's why she remains unaffected. Because silence that comes from wounded pride is easy to read, easy to ignore, and easy to dismiss. But when silence comes with transformation, it tells a different story. But when you stop reacting, not because you've given up, but because you've grown, that's when she starts to question herself. Because now your energy has changed. You no longer look at her as the center of your emotional world. You've taken the attention that once belonged to her and redirected it toward yourself, your goals, your peace, your purpose. You've stopped trying to be understood and started becoming unstoppable. And that's the moment her ego begins to tremble. She can't label this version of you anymore. You're not angry, you're not sad, and you're not chasing closure. You're simply calm. You've outgrown the need to explain, defend, or prove anything. And that calmness disrupts her sense of power. Because for the first time, she can't read you. She can't feel that emotional dependence that once made her feel needed. What she thought was control was just your emotional investment, and now that it's gone, so is her validation. Your silence begins to echo when it's filled with purpose. When your absence isn't about punishing her, but about protecting your peace, it becomes the mirror that reflects her actions back to her. And that reflection hurts far more than your words ever could, because she starts to see the difference between the man she controlled and the man she can't reach anymore. The same silence she once interpreted as defeat now becomes the reminder that she lost something real. Because nothing unsettles a woman's ego more than realizing your silence came not from weakness, but from growth. Silence alone doesn't mean healing. You can stop talking, stop texting, stop showing up, and still be emotionally trapped in the same story. You can go quiet on the outside while your mind is still replaying every word, every memory, every moment she made you feel small. That's not peace. That's emotional paralysis. And that's why your silence doesn't affect her. Because real detachment isn't about removing your voice, it's about removing your dependence on how she responds to it. When your silence comes without internal change, she still feels your attachment. She knows you're quiet, but she also knows you're still waiting for her reaction. That's not distance, that's delayed pain. You think by going silent, you've reclaimed your power, but silence without transformation only freezes you in place. You stop communicating, but you don't stop caring. You stop reaching out, but you don't stop checking if she notices. You stop explaining yourself, but you don't stop hoping she'll finally understand. That's why she doesn't feel your absence, because you're still emotionally available even when you're not physically present. You can't expect silence to create change when your energy still revolves around her. Change is the only thing that gives silence its meaning. The moment your silence turns inward, when you use it to rebuild your strength, redirect your focus, and reinvent your identity, that's when it begins to carry weight. Silence has power only when it reflects growth, not resentment. You can't just stop speaking. You have to start evolving. You have to take all that emotional noise and turn it into discipline. You have to replace the time you spent chasing her with time spent chasing your purpose. Because when you grow in silence, your absence becomes more than just quiet. It becomes undeniable proof of change. And that's when she begins to feel something different. It's not your silence that disturbs her, it's the transformation that follows it. She starts noticing the new tone in your presence, even from a distance. You're calmer, sharper, more focused. You're no longer living in reaction to her indifference. You've stopped trying to prove your worth because now you live in it. She might not admit it, but she can sense that your silence no longer comes from confusion. It comes from clarity. That's when she realizes that she no longer has access to the version of you who once needed her validation. Your silence becomes powerful only when it tells a new story, when it's not about waiting for her to notice, but about becoming someone she no longer recognizes. You stop replaying what went wrong and start rebuilding what's right for you. You stop seeking closure from her and create it within yourself, because silence without change is just noise she can't hear. But silence born from growth is the sound of a man who has finally outgrown the pain that once kept him stuck. And that's when it finally starts to affect her. A woman is not affected by your silence when she knows it comes from emotion rather than evolution. Because deep down, she knows silence can be broken the moment she decides to return. She knows all she has to do is text you and you'll respond. All she has to do is show a little attention and you'll forget the pain she caused. That's why your silence doesn't bother her. It's temporary. It's built on hope, not strength. And anything built on hope that someone will change for you can be destroyed the moment they realize you haven't changed for yourself. She doesn't fear losing you if she knows she can get you back anytime she wants. That's a painful truth most men avoid facing. When you're silent but still emotionally available, you're not taking your power back. You're just pressing pause on the same cycle. You think you're teaching her a lesson, but she's watching closely and knows you're still waiting for her move. She knows your emotions are still tied to her validation, and that gives her comfort, not confusion. Your silence becomes predictable. She sees it as another attempt to make her chase, not as a reflection of genuine indifference. And because she feels no real threat of loss, she feels no reason to change her behavior. But everything shifts when your silence becomes permanent. not out of bitterness, but out of understanding. When you no longer wait for her, when your peace no longer depends on her presence, she begins to feel something she never expected: uncertainty. That's when your silence starts speaking louder than your words ever could. Because now your quiet doesn't carry the vibration of waiting, it carries the weight of self worth. You've stopped revolving around her orbit and she can feel it. You're no longer trying to fix anything, explain anything, or prove anything. You've simply moved on to a higher state of self awareness where her opinions or actions no longer hold the same emotional pull. And this is where silence becomes transformation. When you're focused on your goals, your growth, your peace, your energy starts to shift. You start walking differently, thinking differently, carrying yourself with calm confidence. You no longer look like a man seeking validation. You look like a man who finally remembered who he is. That's when your absence begins to echo in her mind. Because now she's not sure if you'd even answer if she reached out. She starts to feel what you once felt: the uncertainty, the silence, the loss. That's the moment your silence truly affects her, not because you're using it as a tactic, but because it represents freedom. It's no longer about making her miss you, it's about finally no longer needing her to. And that kind of silence doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't break, it simply exists in strength. When your silence becomes peace instead of pain, that's when she finally realizes the man she ignored is gone and he's never coming back. In the end, the reason your silence doesn't affect her is simple. She only feels something when your silence means she's truly lost access to you. Most men go silent as a reaction, not a resolution. They withdraw to get attention, to be missed, to trigger curiosity. But real silence, the kind that makes her think, that makes her question herself, comes when you've outgrown the need to be understood, noticed, or chased. Because it's not the absence of words that speaks the loudest, it's the absence of emotional attachment behind that silence. When she can no longer feel your energy, when she realizes you've stopped checking, stopped wondering, stopped waiting, that's when your silence finally starts to echo. A woman can sense the difference between silence that hides pain and silence that carries peace. One makes her feel powerful, the other makes her uncertain. As long as she feels you still want her attention, she stays comfortable. But the moment she feels that your silence isn't for her, it's for you, everything changes. Because now your quiet isn't part of the game anymore. It's not manipulation, it's liberation. You've stopped using silence to control her emotions and started using it to protect your own. You've chosen peace over proving a point, and that choice unsettles her ego more than any words ever could. When your silence comes with purpose, it starts to carry an energy that speaks louder than any message could. You're not just quiet, you've evolved. You're not waiting, you're living. You're not holding on, you're building forward. The more your life begins to grow in the background, the more your silence transforms from emptiness to presence. You start showing through your actions that you've learned the lesson, not through words meant to impress or hurt. You become the man who no longer reacts to loss because he's too busy creating value. And that's when she feels a sting, not because she lost your voice, but because she lost your access. There's something powerful about a man who no longer tries to explain his worth. His silence carries confidence, not confusion. It tells her that he no longer needs closure because he's already closed the chapter himself. And when she finally realizes that your silence wasn't punishment but transformation, she begins to understand what she truly lost. A man who once cared deeply but learned to care for himself more. That realization hits harder than any argument because it's final. She can't manipulate peace. She can't chase detachment. She can't win against someone who no longer plays. Your silence becomes powerful not when it's used to get a reaction, but when it's born from realization. When it's no longer about what she feels, but about what you've become. Because in the end, the silence that truly affects her is the one that doesn't aim to hurt. It simply reflects that she no longer matters in the same way. And that truth, more than anything you could ever say, is what finally makes her feel the loss.